Hi everyone, I am Brandon Ketron and I'm here with Kevin Cameron, and it's Monday, October 12th, and we're going to go through the new PPP forgiveness application, the 3508S, which is a streamlined application that's now available for borrowers with loans of less than $50,000. So we'll talk about the effect and what those borrowers can do as far as filling out this form and the way it's going to work for those borrowers with small loans. Just a little notice for everyone, Kevin has developed this spreadsheet to help keep track of your PPP loan expenses and the forgiveness calculator. It'll really help you with filing the forgiveness form. It comes with explanation letters as well, so you can go to pppexcel.com if you're interested in the spreadsheet. We have YouTube videos that walk you through how to use the spreadsheet, which are also very informational as far as filling out the loan application as well, so you can review those if you would like. So now we have three different applications. We have the new form 3508S. We have the original PPP forgiveness application, which was released in June. And then we also have the EZ application that was released in June. So what are the differences between the three and who can use what? And that's why we have developed this chart here. So this new form, the 3508S, if you have less than $50,000 in a loan balance, then you can use this new form. There's no real requirements for anyone to retain any employees. It doesn't matter about the number of employees you had. If your loan was less than $50,000, you can use the 3508S. The main application, anyone can still use it, regardless of whether you qualify for the other two. You can elect to use this and provide more detailed documentation if you so prefer. The EZ form is available for any size loan, but there's certain requirements that have to be met first. One, you can just be a self-employed individual with no employees at the time, which if that was the case, you can probably use the 3508S and not have to worry about the EZ. Or if you had employees, you have to have not reduced anyone's salary or reduced the your FTE count to be able to qualify, except if you reduced your FTE count because you were unable to operate at the same level of business activity as you were pre-coronavirus due to the coronavirus, then you can still use the EZ form because you're falling in that safe harbor that does apply for the EZ application. So the nice thing about the new form is there's no Schedule A, there's no requirement to fill out any information about your employees. You don't have to take into account any FTE calculations or wage or salary reductions. It doesn't matter. All you have to do is report that you spent $50,000, provide that calculation or the documentation to support your use of those funds, and that's it. The main form, there's a lot more documentation. There's a Schedule A where you have to list out each employee, the number of hours they worked, what they worked during the covered period, what you paid them pre-coronavirus, what you paid them during your covered period. So it's a pretty complex calculation and documentation requirements that do apply for that main form. The EZ form, a little bit simpler as well, not quite as simple as the S, but you have to report no Schedule A requirements, no FTE calculations. There's a little bit more calculations that's done on the actual form rather than just filling in a blank like you can on the 3508S, but there's still also documentation that has to be attached. So Kevin, any comments on the new form? What you think about it? What is your reaction to this?
Brandon, my first reaction is, why did they even bother doing this? What I guess they figured was that there's roughly 1.7 million loans that are $50,000 or less, and I think they were just trying to make the process of submitting the forgiveness application a little bit easier for those borrowers. The irony is that while you're not required to make a calculation on the form any longer, you still have to make the calculation. So why not put it on the form? That's the part that I don't quite understand, because on the application, you're going to actually have to certify that you did the calculation for the forgiveness amount. And while you don't have to supply it to the lender, you do have to supply all of the backup documentation. The documentation requirement for the 3508 isn't substantially different than the 3508 or the 3508EZ. So what have we really accomplished here? And really what we've accomplished is a little bit of, I guess, a loophole in that these smaller borrowers no longer need to worry about their FTE counts at all, literally. They also don't have to worry about salary and wage reductions. But the problem that we're experiencing with this already, Brandon, is that this application is coming so late in the game that most of these small companies that have borrowed, $50,000 or less, they've already probably used up the money. So this doesn't really accomplish anything then, because they've already done what they needed to do. Now, if you have a borrower that maybe borrowed $50,000 and they let all their employees go, or maybe they let one or two employees go and they have one or two left, these people will probably be much better off, because this worrying about the FTE reduction is no longer an issue. It creates a little bit of a loophole. It's kind of ironic that that's not included in the original CARES Act, which makes us wonder, how did the SBA, or how was the SBA able to change the rules on us? And if you read that interim final ruling that they issued last week for this form, Brandon, you'll recall that they actually state that they believe they have rulemaking authority to make this decision. So, Brandon, wouldn't you agree that probably SBA just figured, since Congress hasn't been able to pass any stimulus reform that would include some additional PPP rulings, that SBA just decided to make the rule themselves?
That's what it looks like. There was proposals in Congress for loans of less than 150,000 to really be kind of automatically forgiven in a way. You just had to sign an attestation form that you tried to comply with the rules. That hasn't went anywhere, so I think this is the SBA's attempt at getting something similar to that, trying to make it easier for borrowers with small amounts of loans.
Yeah, I think the real important thing here is that this is not automatic loan forgiveness. Everybody who's watching this needs to realize that there is no such thing as automatic loan forgiveness right now for any borrower. And what makes this even a little more confusing is the fact that while you don't provide the calculation for the loan forgiveness amount, you provide the documentation. So if you look at the form, if you look at the instructions, I think it's on page 3 of the instructions, because each time they come up with a new form, they shorten the instructions a little bit. But the fact of the matter is they don't change a whole lot. So yeah, if you go to page 3, it specifically makes reference to the fact that what documents you have to provide. So Brandon, of course, being a numbers person, I thought to myself, isn't it possible that my payroll and non-payroll documentation might not support the calculation? And the answer is yes, because let's say that I'm a small business owner and I have 4 employees and I have let 3 of those employees go. Can I still get 100% loan forgiveness now using the yes form? And the answer is yes, I can. But when I supply that payroll information to my lender, how is the lender going to know that those payroll amounts exceed my loan amount, which it does in the particular example I ran like 3 different examples. So what I think we're going to find is that this is going to be kind of like a good faith certification, where you're going to just tell the lender essentially that I used all the money and here's my backup. I don't think the lender is going to try to double check the backup. The fact that we still have to provide the backup documents is a little bit perplexing, because there's no math, there's no calculation done to show whether or not the borrower did achieve full loan forgiveness. So that is going to be a bit of an issue, I believe, with these lenders submitting their applications. I still don't understand why the documentation is there, since on the front page of the application where you're back on, you essentially self-certify that you accurately verified all the payments that were made and you do qualify for 100% loan forgiveness. And the amount, it's really ironic, at the very top there, you see it says the dollar amount for which the forgiveness is required does not exceed the principal amount of the loan, which I think is kind of funny, because why would anybody do that? So it kind of remains to be seen whether or not we're going to see some more movement from the SBA on how this is going to work. I think the most important thing here is that this was probably a slight move in a good direction with respect to the PPP loan program. We don't know how long the lenders are going to take. I've reached out to about a half a dozen lenders today to find out when they're going to start accepting the S form. I only heard back from one of them, and the response was, we don't know because we don't even have this on our portal yet. So if you're in the process of applying and you qualified to file the EZ form, and remember the qualification for the EZ form is either you're self-employed with no employees, or you have a loan in which you are not subject to the pay reduction. It's there at the bottom, the third section down. Or more importantly, that if you did have an FTE reduction, but you were subject to a closure order or some other type of order that prevented you from operating your business at the same level you were on February 15th, then filing the EZ form might be the wise way to go for two reasons. The first reason is that most lenders are accepting the EZ form. We just submitted one, as a matter of fact, this morning for somebody, and the calculation's on there. So I got a feeling that the EZ forms are probably going to be the first ones that get approved, Brandon, and I think that'll speed up the process a little bit. And then I think we'll see more of these S forms being filed maybe later on. We'll just have to kind of wait and see.
Yeah, I think one thing here to point out as well, just for those that do have clients that are looking at filing the S form, is while you have a loan less than 50,000, you can apply, but you have to look at the second requirement too, about your total loan amount with affiliates has to be under 2 million. So if you have a borrower that has a large business with a large loan and a little small business that might have $30,000, $40,000 loan, those add up to exceed 2 million. You still have to use either the EZ or the main application form. You're not eligible for this S form. So that's one little trap to watch out for. The other thing that I think is tricky that Kevin pointed out is, you see here on the application, it's very simple, but if you don't understand how you add up and get the forgiveness amount, it doesn't help you or assist you at all in doing that on the form. It's just one blank here, forgiveness amount, put in your number. The other forms do have, okay, here's what I spent on payroll cost, here's what I spent on utilities, here's what I spent on rent, mortgage interest. That's not here. You just simply input in that amount, and that's it. I think other important parts to mention too is you still have to spend at least 60% of the forgiveness amount on payroll cost. You can't spend it all on interest, rent, or utilities. Most people aren't going to do that anyway. Most people meet the payroll cost requirement if you just continue paying the same salary that you were, or even if you reduce it a little bit, you should be fine meeting this threshold. But just to point that out, you can't spend it all on other items. There's still certifications to be made that you have to initial next to. And then even though, as Kevin mentioned, that we don't have to really provide any calculation, we're just filling this up, we still have to retain those records and show how the calculations were made in the event that we are ever audited on this. So make sure, maybe keep an Excel spreadsheet or something similar that shows how you added up and got that total of the loan forgiveness amount that you are requesting.
Yeah, Brandon, I think that's important to remember here, is that if you're already using an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's the Excel workbook we have or another one, I would recommend that you actually go through with the calculation and maybe even submit that to the lender as an additional document, that a supporting document. We did find out some really good news from somebody we were working with in Texas that had 2 PPP loans. They used our Excel workbook and they submitted it to the lender, and the lender actually accepted it. That's the first time that we've had somebody tell us that the bank actually accepted the Excel worksheets that come along in the workbook. So that was really exciting, encouraging news. But even if you don't use that workbook, it doesn't matter. I think if you do the calculation, even if it's a manual calculation, sending that with the return as a document, or with the 3508S as a document with the disclosures, I think would make a lot of sense, because it would show on your part a good faith effort to calculate the forgiveness amount and comply with the rules that are set out. So again, not really much different. It's not an automatic forgiveness. It kind of surprised, I think, all of us that the documentation requirement was in there. And we'll have to see if they come up with another one that maybe is for loans of 150,000 or less, or something along those lines as well.
Yeah, I think another thing to point out here too is on this cash compensation is all the rules related to the owner employee and the owner. You still can't exceed that 20,833 amount for the owner. You can go up to 46,154 for non-employees, but all those limitations still apply. So for example, let's say you were an independent contractor, you got a loan for 20,833, you had one employee, so you probably got a total loan of around $40,000. If you let that employee go, you can still use the S form, and you don't have to reduce your loan forgiveness amount by reducing their compensation or a drop in your FTE count. But then you can't just pay yourself the full 40,000 and request forgiveness for that. You're still stuck with the 20,833 max for the owner. So you would have to pick up some other employee and pay them salary or wages to be able to qualify for full forgiveness. So be aware of those caps. They do still apply, even though there's relaxed requirements for the reduction, you still have to spend the money to get the forgiveness.
And Brandon, one other thing I would mention is not just that cap, but also all the other rules. You know, the old-fashioned paid and incurred. You know, make sure that the expenses have been paid. Make sure that the expenses were incurred and paid during that 24-week period if you go out the full 24-week covered period. But then also, like I said, I ran a couple different examples, and even within a company that has one owner and 3 employees or 4 employees, I think is what it was, if they went down to 2 employees, they could still get full forgiveness just by paying the employees their regular salaries. But let's say that you're close to full forgiveness with fewer employees. One strategy might be to pay the employee a bonus, maybe pay the bonus a little bit earlier than you normally would if you're going to pay bonuses in 2020. And therefore, you could increase the amount of compensation for an employee in the calculation. Because as Brandon mentioned, if I'm an owner, my salary cap is 20,833 for the 24-week period, assuming that my 2019 compensation was $100,000 or more. If it was less than $100,000, then my salary cap for the forgiveness is going to be 2.5/12 of my 2019 compensation. But my cap for my employees is 46,154. So you have a lot higher cap there, and therefore, if you need to get rid of some of the money, one strategy would be to maybe pay bonuses to your employee or employees to use up the rest of the money. I doubt many borrowers will need to do that, but that's something to consider as well. So really, again, getting back to the true benefit of this new form is the fact that these small borrowers are now completely exempt from the FTE calculations. So we talked about FTE calculations so many times, Brandon, over the last 5 months, 6 months. We're probably sick of hearing about it, and I'm sure our viewers are probably sick of hearing about it. And now all of a sudden, we don't have to worry about it at all. So it's kind of funny that they pulled that on us for these smaller loans.
Yeah, and it is a welcome change, the fact that they did, because it was very cumbersome work to fill out all that information on the Schedule A and have to submit it. So it's nice now for, I'd say, a vast majority of borrowers that we're able to keep the same level of employees, don't really have to worry about their FTE calculations because they can use either the S or the EZ form, which doesn't require those calculations.
Well, and Brandon, back in August, we talked about the fact that the SBA, through its rulemaking and the changes that have been made, it really took a lot of the teeth out of the CARES Act for the FTE calculations. We had one FTE reduction exception in the CARES Act. We have, I believe, 7 now, if I'm not mistaken. So it's 7 different reduction exceptions. Now we have a full exception or exemption, if you will, for 1.7 million borrowers. They no longer even have to worry about FTEs. So again, it's probably coming so late in the game that it might not make that big of a difference for some of our viewers and some of the borrowers, but it's still like you said, welcome news, because it might be a sign of things to come too.
Yep, exactly. So we had the Forbes article here for those that maybe did not get a chance to read that. If you want to go through, I think these 4 points here are really the most important. Again, no reduction in loan forgiveness for reduction in FTEs, no reduction if you had salary or wage reduction, no need to report employee information, and then really there's no calculations to be made on the form. You're just filling in the blank if you are eligible to use this form. So Kevin, any final words that you want to go through here? Or?
Sure. One of the things, Brendan, that I get, somebody asks me practically every day, when should I submit my application?
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I've been telling people that you really can submit it whenever your lender is ready to receive the application. But there's really no rush to submit the application unless you had a concern about staying in business, having to reduce your FTEs, whether or not you were going to be able to continue to pay the people at the rate that you were paying them and not have the greater than 25% pay rate reduction. Like if none of that applied to you, then you're probably better off just waiting and submitting the application when you can. Now that we have this new rule in place, my response doesn't change a whole lot, except to say that you might want to wait for the lender to come out with the 3508S on their portal, or ask them if they'll accept a paper or PDF application of the 3508S if you're ready to submit, because it's all should be pretty much ready to go at that point. So advice hasn't really changed as far as when to submit it. Right now, the majority of people we're working with have not submitted their applications. They're waiting to see what happens and to see, of course, I think we were all waiting for the longest time to see if Congress would pass something that would make some form of semi-automatic forgiveness for those $150,000 or less loans, which unfortunately Congress has never been able to provide us with. So I think we just have to wait for that. We do have one question that popped up that I want to answer real quick before we go, and that is that a viewer asked that if you don't have to worry about your FTEs, then why does the form ask for the number of employees at the time of filing the form? That's a really good question, Ashish, that we don't know the answer to. That question is on the 3508 and on the EZ. I believe that it's on there strictly for like statistical tracking purposes, or maybe the SBA wants to somehow keep track of, metrically keep track of how many employees were essentially totally covered by the PPP program. But that's a really good question, because I think technically in this case, you could put down 0 and it wouldn't really matter because you didn't have to have any employees on your payroll at the time of the application, as long as you spent the money on payroll and non-payroll costs during the period. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on that? Why they asked that question?
No, that was going to be my exact same thought, was that it was just potentially for record keeping purposes for the SBA to throw out, the stats at the end of this saying, hey, we were able to keep X people employed because of the PPP program. I think that's what they're getting at, would be my only guess as to why that's there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think that there'll be some publicly, information made public that says, okay, there was this many millions of employees that were helped by the PPP program or something like that. So I think really everybody just needs to stay tuned and find out if we get any other new information. Maybe we'll have a S2 form that comes out from the SBA for loans that are under maybe 150 or 100. Everybody needs to realize that the average loan was $101,000. So that means there were a lot of small loans that were made in the PPP program.
Kevin, here's another interesting question, that someone's saying that they may not be eligible to use the EZ form because they were closed down due to state orders and not necessarily guidance from the CDC. I think that's been addressed now in some interim final rules, that they say those state orders, since they were really following CDC guidance, are deemed to be a reason why you can have a reduced number of employees. So I think that you are eligible to use the easy form if you're abiding by the state or local government shutdown orders.
And Brandon, I agree with that. It's specifically, the SBA hasn't given us a lot of additional FAQs or interim final rulings on that topic. And so I believe right now we can interpret that very broadly, that if you were subject to any type of local, state, or federal closure order or business reduction order, that was based on really any guidance from a governmental entity, HHS, CDC, or OSHA, I think we're okay as far as that's concerned. And then there's another question regarding the application's kind of confusing because at the top it says that the expiration date is October 31st, 2020. You see that, Brandon, on the form?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, we don't really know why that's on there. We believe that at first I thought maybe they meant October 31st, 2021, because the other applications expire next year. So I think that might have been a drafting error on the SBA's part, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But if not, then yeah, you might need to submit it before or by October 31st, 2020, if you want to use the S form.
Yep. You could always deliver the paper version of this form to the lender, which we've done in some other circumstances to lock in the end of a covered period date if you're worried about that expiration date.
And Brandon, I have some good news on that. Remember we did the webinar last week about the transfer of ownership or selling your business, and what do you do if you've already sold your business or transferred or sold assets? So we had a lender tell us last Monday to go ahead and submit the application ASAP. We submitted the application on Tuesday. On Friday, the borrower got notification from the bank that the application was accepted and was being submitted electronically to the SBA. So that's a good sign that I think the lenders are going to try to work with some of these small businesses that might have sold their business or sold the assets of the business.
Yeah, that's really good news that they're allowing that to go forward. One final question here before we close out. Someone's asking about the EIDL advance, and they're asking that because if you did get that advance, it's going to reduce your forgiveness amount. So say you had a $40,000 loan, you got $5,000 from EIDL, your forgiveness amount is only going to be $35,000, and you're going to have to repay that $5,000, which is why they're asking about that information here on the form. So they're still taking to that account as well. And again, you cannot exceed the principal amount for your loan forgiveness. So in a way that does result in you repaying that EIDL advance. So
that is correct.
If anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out via email. We have our emails on the slides here. We'll be glad to answer those for you. And thanks for tuning in, and we'll keep you guys posted as things progress. It sounds like we might be getting more guidance here soon, and Congress might actually be acting as well. There's some pressure being put on them to pass PPP round 2. So we'll see what happens there and keep you posted. Thank you very much.